What's up, and welcome back. I'm Ashe from fallingleavskungfu.com, and in this video I want to answer a two-part interesting question that I got in my DMs recently. They're interesting questions, but they do deserve some nuance and context, so I thought it was going to be better to just shoot a long-form video and give me something to post to my social media. So without burying the lead, the first part of the question is, can Li Chuan be trained to be an outside fighter effectively, as sort of similar to like Floyd Mayweather, staying outside the pocket, using a lot of evasive footwork and counter striking, as opposed to being an inside fighter where you're going to be staying in the pocket. And the second part of the question had to deal specifically with my opinion, because I'm a high-ranking Li Chuan student and instructor. So diving right in, I want to make a disclaimer first that in some cases I will speak definitively on Li Chuan, and in other cases I will make it clear that I'm only speaking from my experience and my perspective. So for the purposes of this video, I want to make it clear that I'm speaking from my own personal perspective and experience, and not broadly on behalf of Grandmaster Sam Chin or on Li Chuan as a whole. So this question was prompted in part by a recent post that I made on my Facebook page. I had Dave Chesser of Lao Pai Kung Fu on the 3 branches of Shaolin. So I'll throw that up on the screen. I'll put a link in the video description below if you want to look at that more closely. But basically, he was illustrating the 3 main branches of Shaolin in Chinese martial arts: the northern branch, the sort of Fujian branch, and the Hakka branch. Okay, so Li Chuan comes specifically through the Hakka branch, specifically the nomad style, right, or the wanderer style. We have roots in that branch of Hakka Shaolin. So going back to the question of, can Li Chuan be trained effectively to be an outside fighter? Broadly speaking, I would say that the instinct that Li Chuan is geared more towards being an inside fighter is correct, like a lot of the Hakka systems. So while we've all seen the social media videos and YouTube videos of a fighter fighting multiple opponents in the street, whatever, and staying on the outside, using a lot of footwork and being able to take out multiple attackers. So can that approach work? Yes. But broadly speaking, in a self-defense scenario, that may or may not be possible. So let's just say that in the context of a given self-defense scenario, it's not possible. Either the environment won't allow for it, or some other conditions won't allow for it, right? So then the question is, how do you finish that fight as quickly as possible, right? And you need to just go in, right? So let's say you've got an attacker between you and somebody that you're trying to help, right? So you need to get to that person as fast as possible, or maybe this person is in the way, and where you need to get to is in the room behind them, something like that. In that case, you only have one choice, which is to just go through, right? You have to close that distance and then finish that fight as quickly as possible, right? So broadly speaking, martial arts in general, the goal is always, how do you finish a fight as quickly as possible? So again, getting into the self-defense context, we want our attacks to be as devastating as possible, which is why, again, when you start training more on the self-defense stuff, you're going to be attacking the vulnerable cavities like the throat, ears, eyes, nose, the temple, that kind of thing, right? And like the vulnerable cavities, like in what they would refer to as like dimak, right, in Chinese martial arts. So even in within the I Liq Chuan as a community, we have sort of a private joke about the Frankenstein walk. We're just going to put the hands up and just go in, right? So we use sort of a high, long guard and kind of just walk in, right? So in that case, then yes, as I Liq Chuan overall is geared more towards inside fighting. Now, with that said, especially in a sport context or a competitive fight, yes, you can learn how to control the distance and angle with your footwork and be more of an outside fighter. So if you look at some of the sparring videos that I've posted of me and my youngest son, you know, I'll tend to stay outside and control that distance a little bit until I see my opportunity, and then I'll close, right? And then once I close that distance and we're within that contact range of what we would call the first section, then it goes right into like the sticky and spinning hand type application. There's some nuance there, because in that case, since I'm training my son, I'm trying to give him the opportunity to develop the confidence to be able to close the distance. It's something that we're still working on. But with that said, is some of the reason that I'm maintaining that distance is because I'm trying to set up the opportunity for him to close the distance. But regardless, is you can still learn that how to use your footwork to control the distance and angles and stay outside. But yes, broadly speaking, I Liq Chuan is meant to be more of an inside fighting system. Okay, so now to the second part of the question, which was specifically that since I had fought full contact and since I had been coached by Grandmaster Sam Chin in doing so, that this person would value my insight on the subject. So I'm trying to tread a fine line here. But first of all, the first thing that I would say is that my fighting experience informs my I Liq Chuan much more than I Liq Chuan informed my fighting experience. And you know, there's some important reasons of why I would say that. So as in my competitive fighting career was more about the learning process for me than it was about like trying to prove anything about the effectiveness of I Liq Chuan. And there's a couple different reasons for that. So everything about the context, right? Context is king. So at that time when I was fighting, which my last fight was already more than 15 years ago now, I was only about halfway through the student level curriculum. So I was still working on trying to get my student level 5. At that time, we have 11 student levels. And I think even I started, I can't remember, I was around like level 4, level 5, level 6, somewhere all in that range during the few years that I was fighting competitively. So I only had part of the puzzle, right? I didn't have the context of the whole puzzle. And also at that time, you guys got to remember, I've always been a distance student. So, you know, I saw Sifu a handful of times per year. And during that period, when I was fighting competitively, I actually got much more direct coaching from 2 different people that weren't Grandmaster Sam Chin, specifically on the subject of Sandao or free fighting, competitive fighting. So the first one is Alexander Skalzub, who is the chief instructor of Moscow, right, of the I Liq Chuan school. He's the chief instructor of the Russian-speaking countries for I Liq Chuan. But even his approach at that time, again, this was going back 15 years ago, was also heavily informed by his prior experience with Wing Chun and you know, just kickboxing in general and fighting competitively in Russia. So I got a lot of like tips and pointers and coaching from him, and that helped me get a better sense of how to apply I Liq Chuan in an actual fighting scenario. Yes, it's a sport art, you know, it's whatever. And then the second person was a guy named Matt Smith. Chances are you've never heard of the name of Matt Smith, but he's a local hardman, or was a local hardman here in the Phoenix area. He actually played an important role behind the scenes in the early days of the UFC. So he had started out with a group of guys here training the striking arts, and they just noticed, like, hey, we keep ending up on the ground a lot. So how do we get to the ground more effectively or faster? So then they transitioned into doing judo, started working on their takedowns and throws, and then the light bulb sort of went off for them. Well, if we're going to wind up on the ground all the time, you know, how do we deal with that? And so then they went more towards catch wrestling and BJJ, like back in the 80s, right? So then when the early days of the UFC came around, they were in large part responsible for going to the Pan Am Games and helping to recruit guys like Dan Severn, Don Fry, and Mark Coleman, and then helping them transition from being pure freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestlers into submission grapplers. If you're not familiar, Dan Severn was, you know, around that time, the wrestling coach for Arizona State University. So again, it's all like a local connection. But I was doing some training with him during that window of when I was fighting competitively, which is why, like, towards some of my middle fights, you'll see me using a lot more like leg reaping and like takedown type techniques, more grappling. So again, all of this is to say that at that time, 15 years ago, I didn't have the full picture of I Liq Chuan, and so now moving forward 15 years later, now that I've completed the student level curriculum, my fighting experience of, you know, having been, you know, on the platform informs my approach to I Liq Chuan much more than I Liq Chuan ever informed my fighting, again, at that time, right? So those are important caveats, just context and nuance that you want to think about, especially when you're asking my personal opinion on these topics. But this video has already gone on longer than I had intended. But again, it does deserve some careful consideration. That's going to do it for this video. As always, train hard, stay strong. I'll catch you guys next time.